Come closer. You've been feeling it too, haven't you? That shiver that comes from deep inside, the one no blanket can chase away. It's not just the winter chill, it's something older, something colder. It's the kind of cold that doesn't just lower the temperature, but drains the very warmth from your bones, leaving you hollow. If you want to understand, if you dare to face what truly lies in the shadows, then like and subscribe. Join us. Never miss a nightmare. Because what I'm about to tell you is a story of a cold that breathes, a cold that thinks, and a cold that consumes. Our story begins in a forgotten place, a small hospice nestled in the northern reaches of the United States. The sky there is always gray, the air always heavy. It's a place where life slowly fades, a gentle ending for those who have lived their full measure, or so it used to be. This place, called Hope's End, was supposed to be a sanctuary, a warm embrace against the inevitable. In this quiet corner of the world worked Elara, a hospice nurse. She was a woman known for her touch, a touch that brought comfort to the dying. They said she had a gift, an empathy so profound it could soothe the most tormented souls. Elara herself was familiar with the shadow of illness. A quiet sickness had taken root within her, slowly, patiently. Her days were spent in quiet rooms, holding hands, whispering words of peace. Her patients found solace in her presence, a warmth that seemed to radiate from her, a calm that settled over their final moments. She was their anchor in the drifting current of their last days. Then the cold began. At first, it was subtle, a sudden drop in temperature in Mrs. Henderson's room, despite the hospice's old heating system working overtime. Elara checked the thermostat, saw it read a comfortable 70 degrees. She shrugged it off. Old buildings had quirks. The next day it was Mr. Davies. His room, too, felt like an icebox. Again, the thermostat read perfectly fine. Elara called maintenance, who found nothing wrong. They blamed the old pipes, the drafty windows. Elara, ever the pragmatist, accepted their answers. It had to be faulty equipment. But the patients began to speak of it. Not just the cold in the room, but a cold that came from within. Nurse Elara, old Mr. Petrov would whisper, his voice raspy, "I'm shivering, but it's not the air. It's inside me. A deep chill like ice in my veins." He was wrapped in 3 blankets, yet his teeth chattered. Elara would offer warm drinks, extra blankets, anything to soothe them. She'd rub their hands, her own touch usually so comforting. But the internal chill, they said, defied all her efforts. It was a shiver that started in their bones and spread outwards, a cold that no external warmth could reach. Elara, always focused on her patients, noticed something strange. After prolonged contact, after holding a patient's hand for a long time, her own hands would feel unusually cold. Not just cool from the air, but a deep, penetrating chill. It was like the cold had seeped into her. She'd rub her hands together, hold them under warm water, but the cold lingered. It wasn't painful, not at first. Just a persistent, unnatural chill that defied her efforts to warm herself. It was a strange feeling, like the warmth had been siphoned away, leaving an empty space. She started to check her patients' temperatures more often, using a digital thermometer. Always normal, always within the healthy range. Yet they shivered, they spoke of the chill, and Elara's hands, after touching them, felt like they'd been dipped in ice water. The feeling of dread began to creep in. It was a quiet dread, a whisper in the back of her mind. What if it wasn't the old building? What if it wasn't faulty equipment? What if it was something else, something she couldn't explain? The cold was localized, contained within each patient's room, like a bubble of unnatural chill. She'd step out into the hallway and the air would feel normal, even warm. But re-enter a patient's room and the unseen chill would return, settling on her skin. Sometimes she'd notice a faint, almost invisible layer of frost on the inside of the windows in those rooms. But it wasn't the kind of frost you'd see in winter. It was too fine, too delicate, like a breath frozen midair. She'd wipe it away, and it wouldn't return until later. The internal chill was becoming more common. More patients spoke of it, their voices filled with a quiet terror. They described it as a slow, creeping invasion, a feeling of their very essence being leached away, leaving behind a hollow space. One evening she sat with Mrs. Albright, a gentle soul nearing her end. Mrs. Albright's breathing was shallow, her eyes fluttering. Elara held her hand, her usual comforting touch now feeling strangely distant, almost cold to herself. Suddenly Mrs. Albright's eyes snapped open. Wide, unblinking, they were lucid, impossibly so, for someone so close to the end. A strange, pale light seemed to reflect in them, like moonlight on ice. "The cold, Mrs. Albright whispered, her voice a dry rustle barely audible. "It's reaching inside, deep inside." Her gaze was fixed on something beyond Elara, something unseen. Elara leaned closer, her own heart pounding. "What is it, dear? What do you see?" she urged, trying to rationalize it as a final delirium, a hallucination brought on by her fading life. Mrs. Albright's hand, which Elara still held, slowly, subtly grew rigid. Not the slackness of death, but a stiffening, a strange, unyielding firmness. The warmth drained from it, replaced by an intense, deep cold that penetrated Elara's own hand. Elara snatched her hand back, a gasp catching in her throat. The cold was overwhelming, a raw, burning sensation against her skin. It was more than just a lack of heat. It was an active extraction, a violation. Mrs. Albright's eyes remained open, unblinking, perfectly lucid, yet unseeing. Her breath had stopped. She was gone, but there was no peace in her stillness, only a terrifying, perfect preservation. A single tear, frozen solid, clung to her cheek. Elara stood there, frozen herself, not by the room's temperature, but by a dawning horror. This wasn't delirium. This wasn't a natural death. Mrs. Albright's body was a husk, perfectly preserved, but her eyes held a lingering awareness, a silent scream frozen in time. She tried to rationalize it. Shock, grief, the exhaustion of her own illness, but the cold in her hands, the memory of Mrs. Albright's eyes burned through her denial. It was like a piece of the chill had embedded itself deep within her. And the world outside Hope's End, beyond the hospice walls, seemed to hold its breath. A silent, consuming cold was spreading, turning organic matter into crystalline prisons. A cold that didn't just kill, but preserved. A cold that hinted at a chilling, agonizing awareness. What would happen when it reached her, and what would happen to those she tried to comfort? The first chill had settled, and it was only the beginning. Elara stared at Mrs. Albright, the single tear frozen on her cheek. The room was unnaturally cold, a biting chill that clung to the air. This was not just death, it was something else, something terrifyingly still. The perfect preservation of her patient's body filled Elara with dread. Those wide, unblinking eyes haunted Elara. They held a strange flicker, a knowing gaze that defied the stillness of death. It was as if a part of Mrs. Albright was still trapped, still watching, frozen in that final moment. Elara tried to deny it, to push the horror away. She rubbed her hands, but the deep cold from Mrs. Albright's touch lingered in her own bones, a persistent ache. It felt like it had seeped into her very core. The next morning, the whispers began. More patients reported the internal chill, a common complaint now. "Nurse Elara," they'd say, "I feel cold from the inside out." It was spreading, a silent epidemic. When Elara touched them, their skin felt strange. Not just cool, but oddly smooth, almost waxy. It was like touching a marble statue, not a living person. A chill ran down her spine. "It's inside me, nurse," one patient rasped, his voice thin. "Like my heart is turning to ice." What would you say to someone who felt their very essence freezing? How could you offer comfort? Elara's own bones began to ache with a new cold, deeper than her illness. It was a gnawing chill, especially after a long shift. It was not just fatigue, it was something else, something consuming. She started wearing more layers, a thick sweater under her scrubs, an extra scarf, but the chill never left her. It was a constant companion, a presence that settled deep within her bones. The local news began to mention odd weather phenomena. Strange frost patterns, they called them, appearing in unusual places. The reporters tried to explain it away as a cold snap. But Elara saw them too, inside the hospice. On the windows of the patient rooms, delicate frost patterns grew, too intricate, too sharp to be natural, like frozen lace stretching across the glass. It felt like a living thing, these patterns. They grew daily, silently, across the glass. A beautiful, yet terrifying, testament to the unseen cold that was taking hold, a cold that shouldn't exist. Then came Mr. Peterson. He passed quietly in his sleep, or so they thought. Elara found him during her rounds. The room was colder than any she had felt before. His body was stiff, not with the slackness of death, but an unnatural rigidity. It was as if every muscle had seized, frozen in place. An unyielding firmness, unlike anything she had felt. His eyes were wide open, a flicker in them just like Mrs. Albright's. A silent, knowing gaze that seemed to pierce through Elara. It was a look of profound, conscious awareness, frozen in time. This wasn't rigor mortis. This was a terrifying, perfect preservation. A frozen moment, a grotesque tableau. The cold radiating from him was a consuming void, pulling the warmth from the air. Elara felt the cold radiating from him, an icy wave that washed over her. Her own hands felt colder than ever, a deep, penetrating chill that no amount of rubbing could dispel. A chilling thought began to form. What if her touch, meant to comfort, was now bringing this terrifying stasis? What if she was not a healer, but a conduit for this unnatural cold? Later that day, Mrs. Albright's daughter came to collect her mother's belongings. Elara watched her, a knot of dread tightening in her stomach. She knew what was coming. The daughter found her cat, Mittens. It was in its favorite sleeping spot, curled up, perfectly still. A picture of peaceful sleep, too perfect, too still. A silent, horrifying premonition. Elara saw it. Mittens was frozen solid, perfectly preserved in its natural pose. Its fur was like spun ice, its whiskers brittle glass. Every detail was there, unnervingly perfect. And its eyes were open, wide, a horrifying glint in them, a reflection of light that suggested awareness. A conscious prison trapped in a petrified form. It was a silent, petrified scream. Elara struggled to believe what she saw. A living creature, frozen yet aware. It broke something inside her, shattered her understanding of life and death. This was beyond natural law. The cold wasn't just a physical threat. It was a violation of life itself, a conscious prison. The horror of being preserved beyond death, of being aware while your body was a frozen tomb. The deep ache in Elara's own bones intensified. The cold had found a home within her, growing stronger with each passing hour. She felt it spreading, reaching into her very core. And as Elara looked out, the world seemed to hold its breath. The entire town was turning into a grotesque, living diorama, every detail perfectly preserved in ice. The Permafrost Geist was truly here. What would happen when it reached her, and what would happen to those she tried to comfort? The deep, aching cold from Mitten's frozen body had settled within Elara. It was not just in her hands, but in her bones, a persistent, gnawing chill. The world outside Hope's End, she knew, was turning into a grotesque diorama, every detail perfectly preserved in ice. The Permafrost Geist was truly here, and it was spreading. More patients succumbed, one after another. Their bodies were not limp with death, but stiff, unyielding husks. Each one was perfectly preserved, a chilling statue of their final moments. The horror of it was a silent scream in the quiet halls. Elara tried to warm them, to bring comfort. She'd place her hands on their foreheads, hold their stiffening fingers. But each time she felt it, her own warmth, the very heat of her life, being drawn away, siphoned into the cold forms. Her hands ached, a deep, pervasive cold that no amount of rubbing or warm water could chase away. It was a cold that settled deep in her joints, making them stiff and clumsy. It felt like her very essence was being leached. The horrifying thought grew. Was her touch, meant to heal and comfort, now a conduit for this unnatural cold? Was she, the one who brought warmth, now accelerating their terrifying stasis? The fear of her own hands became unbearable. Then came the family member, Mrs. Albright's nephew, his face pale and drawn. Her eyes, he stammered, they followed me, even after she was frozen. He looked at Elara, desperate for belief. Elara's heart pounded. She knew it was true. She had seen it herself in Mrs. Albright's eyes, and in Mr. Peterson's, and in Mitten's. A lingering awareness, a silent, conscious prison within the frozen form. The nephew was not mad, but the local authorities, when called, dismissed him. Grief, they said, trauma. Elara watched, a knot of dread tightening. They couldn't see it or wouldn't. She was alone in this chilling knowledge. Desperate for answers, Elara turned to old local folklore. She spent her nights in the hospice library, poring over forgotten books, searching for anything that might explain the unnatural cold. Dusty pages, brittle with age, spoke of ancient chills, tales whispered from generations past, of winters that never ended, of a cold that lived and breathed. It was like looking into a forbidden mirror. Then she found it. Obscure tales of a winter's soul or a permafrost spirit. Names whispered in fear, words that sent a fresh wave of cold through her already chilled body. It felt too real. The legends described an entity that stole warmth, not just killing, but preserving. It trapped the living dead in eternal stillness, their consciousness lingering, a horrifying, silent agony. A weaponized comfort, indeed. The parallels were chilling. Every detail matched what she had seen. The delicate frost patterns, the perfect preservation, the lingering awareness in the eyes. The lines between myth and reality blurred into a terrifying truth. A cold understanding settled over her. This wasn't a disease, it wasn't natural, it was ancient, malevolent, and it was here. The terror was no longer creeping, it was a vast, open maw. Her own illness, the cold that had always been a part of her, now felt like a connection, a horrifying vulnerability. Was she being prepared? Was she already claimed? Then the shattering blow. She watched a patient, already frail, shiver violently after her touch. The cold in his room deepened instantly. Her comforting touch, meant to bring peace, was accelerating the process, drawing out their warmth more rapidly. She was not a healer. She was a conduit. Every act of compassion, every comforting touch, was a weapon speeding their inevitable conscious stasis. The realization tore at her very soul. Her empathy, her life's purpose, shattered into icy fragments. How could she continue? How could she bring comfort, knowing it brought only a faster, more terrifying end? The guilt was a physical weight. She looked at her hands, once symbols of solace, now instruments of dread. They trembled, not from cold, but from a profound, existential horror. The weaponization of comfort was a cruelty she could barely comprehend. The old hospice generator, already strained by the unnatural cold, began to sputter. Lights flickered, casting erratic shadows that danced like ghosts. The hum of the machinery grew weaker, a dying gasp. Then, with a final, shuddering groan, the generator failed. The hospice plunged into absolute darkness, save for the weak glow of emergency lights. An absolute, suffocating cold descended, thick and immediate. It was not just cold, it was a vacuum pulling all warmth, all life from the air. Her breath plumed in front of her, a frozen cloud. The chill was total, a living presence pressing in on all sides. And then, in the profound silence of the suffocating cold, she heard them. Faint, crystalline whispers, like the sound of ice cracking on a still lake. They echoed in the frigid air, too clear to be a trick of the mind. The whispers grew, a chorus of tiny, sharp sounds, like 1,000 brittle voices. They swirled around her, brushing against her skin, a chilling symphony of frozen despair. They were not just sounds, they were shapes forming in the air. And then, from the heart of the crystalline whispers, a single, clear voice formed, cutting through the frigid air, sharp as a shard of ice. It spoke her name, a chilling welcome into its eternal stillness. Elara, welcome home. The voice, sharp as ice, echoed in the darkness. Elara, welcome home. It wasn't a sound from outside, but from within her own mind, a chilling whisper that settled deep in her bones. The generator's silence was absolute, a heavy blanket of dread. Her body felt like a statue already, stiff and heavy. Each movement was a struggle, as if her muscles were resisting, turning to brittle glass. The cold within her was no longer just an ache, it was a physical barrier. A constant tremor ran through her, a deep vibration from within. It felt like her blood was not flowing, but trying to crystallize, turning sluggish and thick, each beat of her heart a painful, icy thud. Her skin was perpetually cold, a deep, bone-chilling cold that radiated outwards. Even wrapped in thick blankets, she felt like a block of ice, unable to hold warmth, a living, breathing paradox. She tried to cry, to release the terror, but no tears came. They froze on her face, turning into tiny, sharp icicles, a cruel mockery of grief. Her voice, when she tried to speak, was a brittle whisper, barely there. Elara moved to the window, her stiff movements slow. Outside, the world was silent, utterly still. The snow had stopped, but the cold remained, a thick, visible presence that clung to everything. Cars, once rushing through the streets, were now encased in bizarre ice sculptures, their shapes twisted and unnatural. They stood like monuments to a sudden, terrible end, frozen in their last moments. People were frozen mid-stride, caught in the act of living. A child reaching for a toy, a man opening a door. Their forms were perfectly preserved, a horrifying stillness that defied belief. Their expressions were a mix of surprise and silent agony, perfectly preserved, every line of fear etched onto their frozen faces. What terror had they felt in their last, conscious moments? The entire town was a grotesque, living diorama, a monument to petrified, silent suffering. Every detail was there, unnervingly perfect, a silent scream frozen in time. This was the Geist's terrible art. The realization hit her like a physical blow. They were cut off. The hospice was an island in an ocean of ice, an inescapable prison. The cold was not just outside, it was everywhere, reaching for her. A desperate urge to escape surged through her. She had to try. She moved towards the main entrance, her stiff limbs protesting, her breath pluming in the frigid air. There had to be a way out. But the roads were impassable, blocked by towering, unnatural ice formations. They rose like jagged teeth, sharp and unforgiving, a wall of frozen terror. There was no way through, no way around. These weren't natural formations. They pulsed with a faint, internal glow like living things. The cold was not just a force, it was a presence, a sentient prison that had sealed them in. The cold was everywhere, a living entity pressing in on all sides. It was an inescapable, sentient prison, its icy grip tightening with every passing moment. There was nowhere left to run. Defeated, Elara turned back into the hospice's frigid heart. The silence was broken only by the crackle of her own stiff movements, the subtle crunch of ice forming on the floor. Then a flicker. At the end of the long, dark hallway, a translucent shape shimmered. It was too tall, too still to be real. A familiar outline, yet utterly alien. As she watched, more shapes appeared lining the hallway. Her patience, their frozen husks, perfectly preserved, stood like grotesque statues, bathed in the eerie emergency light. Their eyes, they were wide, unblinking, and they followed her. A silent, piercing gaze that seemed to bore into her soul. They were aware, trapped in their icy prisons. A horrifying symphony of silent screams echoed only in her mind. Not sounds, but feelings. Pure, agonizing terror trapped in a conscious paralysis. It was a torture she felt as if it were her own. This was it, the Permafrost Geist. It was directly communicating its horrific art, showing her its collection, its victims. And she was the audience, forced to witness their eternal suffering. She recognized them all. Mr. Davies, Mrs. Albright, Mr. Peterson. Every face was one she had comforted, one she had touched. Her touch, meant to bring peace, had brought this. The guilt was a crushing weight, heavier than the cold itself. Her empathy, her purpose, had been weaponized. Every comforting touch had been a step closer to this conscious stasis. The whispers returned, no longer faint. They were clear, distinct, a chorus of brittle voices swirling around her, brushing against her skin. They were no longer just sounds. They were thoughts directly in her mind. And then a single thought, cold and clear as a shard of ice, echoed through her very being. Soon, Elara, you will join our beautiful collection. You will be the masterpiece. The voice of the Permafrost Geist, cold and clear, still echoed in Elara's mind. Soon, Elara, you will join our beautiful collection. You will be the masterpiece. Her own body was no longer just cold. It was becoming a part of the Geist's chilling art. A deep, racking cough tore through her, raw and painful. It felt like her lungs were tearing apart. When the cough finally subsided, she felt something hard and sharp on her tongue. She spat it out, her eyes wide with horror. It was a tiny shard of ice, perfectly formed, glistening in the faint light. Not a drop of blood, just crystal. Her own breath, her own being, was freezing from within. This was it. The terminal illness that had been slowly consuming her was now merging with the Geist's chill. The two pains, one familiar, one alien, twisted together. She was becoming a living vessel for the cold, an icy echo chamber. Her joints ached with a deep, persistent cold, making every movement a deliberate act. Her hands, once soft and comforting, felt like rigid claws. The warmth had truly left her, replaced by a constant, internal shiver that rattled her very bones. She could feel the change, slow and agonizing. Her skin was growing taut, her muscles stiffening. She was becoming another one of the Geist's victims, a living statue. But unlike the others, she was still conscious, still aware of the horror. There was only one patient left, a child, young, frail, and still clinging to a thread of life. Elara had avoided her room, fearing what her touch would bring, but now a desperate hope ignited in her frozen heart. Could she offer one last, true comfort? She had to try. She had to believe that her empathy, her true self, could break through the Geist's hold. She would give this child a peaceful end, not the horrifying, conscious stasis that awaited all the others. A true release, not a petrified prison. With slow, deliberate steps, Elara approached the child's room. The air grew colder with each step, a palpable weight pressing down on her. The silence was absolute, broken only by the faint, shallow breaths of the tiny patient. She reached the bedside. The child was barely breathing, a wisp of life in a world of ice. Elara's heart ached with a profound, desperate tenderness. This was her last chance to be a nurse, to offer true solace. What would you do in her place with such a terrible choice? She took a deep, shuddering breath, the cold air burning her lungs. She extended her hand, her movements slow and heavy. Her fingers, stiff and aching, reached for the child's small, fragile hand. This was it, the final touch. The moment her gloved fingers brushed the child's skin, an immense surge of cold, unlike anything she had ever felt, erupted. It wasn't just cold. It was a searing void, a direct siphon. It tore through her, ripping away her remaining warmth, her very life force. A gasp caught in her throat, raw and painful. Her body stiffened, every muscle seizing. It was like an invisible cord had been attached, pulling her essence, accelerating her own inevitable transformation. Her empathy, her greatest gift, had become the ultimate conduit. The child's breathing stopped. No peaceful sigh, no gentle fading, just an abrupt, chilling stillness. Elara felt the life drain from the small body, but also from her own. She was feeding the Geist, making it stronger. And the child's eyes, wide and unblinking, fixed on Elara, not with peace, but with that familiar, terrifying lucidity. A conscious awareness, frozen in a silent scream. Elara had not brought peace. She had only accelerated the terror. The cold in her own body intensified, a deep, pervasive ache that settled into her very bones. She could feel the crystallization beginning, a slow, agonizing process. She was becoming a part of the collection even as she stood there. Then the whispers returned, but they were no longer just sounds. They were visions assaulting her mind, not just images, but raw, incomprehensible concepts. She was seeing glimpses of the Permafrost Geist itself, its extra-dimensional nature laid bare. She saw a vast, ancient hunger stretching across dimensions, consuming warmth, life, and vitality. It was not a creature with teeth and claws, but a cosmic void, an absolute cold that turned organic matter into crystalline prisons. It fed on warmth, yes, but its true nourishment was the agony of awareness trapped within the frozen form. The lingering consciousness, the silent screams, these were its true feast. It was a predator of the soul. The visions intensified, becoming unbearable. It was a collective consciousness of suffering, a symphony of frozen despair. Each icy husk was a note in its terrifying composition, a testament to its power. The Geist was not just killing, it was creating a vast, horrifying museum of suffering, a living diorama of agony. And she, Elara, the hospice nurse, was not just a victim. She was something more. A chilling realization dawned, cutting through the cold like a shard of ice. Her empathy, her profound ability to connect with suffering made her unique. It made her the perfect centerpiece. The Geist had not just chosen her by chance. It had sought her out. Her very essence, her ability to feel the pain of others, was what made her valuable. It was what made her the ultimate canvas for its art. Every comforting touch, every moment of shared sorrow had been a lesson in how to draw out the warmth, how to preserve the consciousness. She had been its unwitting apprentice, preparing herself for this. The whispers returned, now a single, clear voice in her mind, not a welcome, but a declaration. Your empathy, Elara, is the most exquisite pain. It will preserve you, perfectly aware, in an agony beyond measure. The cold consumed her, not in a rush, but slowly, painfully, preserving every ounce of her awareness. She felt her body stiffen, her breath catch, her heart slow. The world around her blurred, becoming a swirling vortex of ice and silent screams. She was becoming the masterpiece. And the horror she knew had only just begun. What would it be like to be frozen, yet forever feel? The cold was no longer just around Elara. It was in her, a deep, pervasive chill that had taken root in her very core. Her body felt heavy, each limb a burden, almost fully encased in a delicate internal frost. She could barely move, her muscles stiff, resisting her will. The cold was a living entity, making her its own. Her breath, once warm and life-giving, now plumed in front of her, a thick, icy mist that hung in the air. It was a visible sign of the change, a chilling confirmation that the cold was not just outside, but had claimed her from within. Every exhale was a tiny, frozen cloud, a testament to her transformation. She tried to lift her hand, to flex her fingers, but her limbs felt like lead. They moved with a slow, grinding reluctance, as if her joints were filled with sand, or worse, with ice. The internal frost was tightening its grip, turning her into a living statue, piece by slow piece. Her thoughts, once quick and sharp, were slowing. They felt brittle, like thin sheets of ice. Each idea formed with a painful deliberation, a crystalline thought emerging from a deepening freeze. It was as if her very mind was being preserved, every fear, every memory, held in perfect, agonizing stasis. A chilling realization settled over her. This wasn't dying. This was being preserved. The cold wasn't ending her life. It was freezing it, holding her in a state of suspended animation. She was becoming a part of the Geist's collection, not as a corpse, but as a living, aware monument. She saw her reflection in the dark, frosted glass of a window. It was a distorted image, shimmering like a mirage, but undeniably her. And what she saw filled her with a fresh wave of horror. Her face, pale and translucent, seemed to glow with an inner chill. Her eyes, wide and unblinking, stared back at her from the reflection. They were perfectly preserved, a horrifying mirror of the eyes she had seen in Mrs. Albright, in Mr. Peterson, in the cat mittens. There was no warmth, only a terrifying lucidity, a conscious awareness trapped behind the frozen surface. Her skin, she noticed, had a strange, waxy quality, almost translucent. It was like looking at a delicate sculpture, not living flesh. The warmth was gone, replaced by a subtle internal glow that hinted at the crystallization beneath. She was becoming a work of art, a grotesque masterpiece. She was becoming one of them. The frozen husks, the silent statues she had seen throughout the hospice, throughout the town. She was joining the collection, not in death, but in a horrifying, conscious stasis. The line between observer and observed had blurred, then vanished. The horror was not of dying, but of being preserved, of being aware, forever, trapped within a frozen form. This was the Geist's true cruelty, its ultimate torture. To exist, but to be unable to move, to speak, to scream, to be a monument to agony. A final, desperate internal struggle ignited within her. To let go, to find peace, true peace, the kind she had sought for her patients, to surrender to the void, to let consciousness fade, to escape the horrifying preservation. It was a battle fought in the deep, silent chambers of her mind, or to resist, to fight against the conscious preservation, to claw her way back from the brink of eternal stasis. To deny the Geist its ultimate prize. But how do you fight something that is already inside you, turning your very being to ice? But the Geist's hold was absolute. It was not a force that could be fought with strength or will. It was a consuming presence, a cosmic void that had already claimed her. Every beat of her slowing heart, every crystalline thought, was a testament to its victory. A flicker of her old self, her compassionate, defiant spirit, tried to ignite. A spark of rage against the injustice, the cruelty of this fate. But it was quickly snuffed out by the encroaching cold, a tiny flame in an endless glacier. The realization washed over her, cold and clear as a shard of ice. Resistance was futile. It was only prolonging the agony, extending the conscious torment. There was no escape, no victory, only the inevitable, chilling embrace. Then the air around her began to crackle, not with sound, but with something far more unsettling. A subtle vibration, a faint hum that resonated deep within her frozen bones. It was the voices of the frozen, a chorus of silent, agonizing awareness. It was not sound, not in the way we understand it. It was a collective scream, a symphony of pure, raw terror and despair. A chorus of 1,000 shattered souls, trapped in their crystalline prisons, their agony echoing through the frigid air, through her very being. And she, Elara, with her extraordinary empathy, could now fully perceive it. The Geist had given her the terrible gift of understanding, of feeling their endless pain as if it were her own. Every frozen husk, every petrified form, was broadcasting its silent scream directly into her mind. This was the terror of frozen time, to be conscious, yet utterly immobile, to witness the world but be unable to interact, to feel the relentless passage of moments stretched into an eternity of silent agony. And she was now a part of this eternal torment. The voices, the screams, were not just thoughts. They were pure, raw emotion, unfiltered agony pouring into her. It was the Geist's true nourishment, the conscious suffering it harvested. And she, the empathetic nurse, was now its most sensitive receiver. Her hand, once soft and comforting, was now a crystal claw. The transformation was almost complete. In her final act, was it defiance or ultimate surrender? She reached out, her fingers stiff, translucent, shimmering with internal frost. Not to comfort, not to soothe, but to join, to merge with the monument of agony that stretched beyond the hospice walls, beyond the town, into the vast, frozen world. To become one with the collective, conscious suffering. The world outside was a sculpture of petrified, silent suffering. Every tree, every building, every living thing turned into a monument of agony. A grotesque art gallery created by the Permafrost Geist for itself, and now for her. Her last thought, a chilling whisper in the endless cold, was not for herself, but for you. A horrifying question echoing in the silence. But you felt that too, haven't you? The cold that steals your very breath, your very soul, leaving only the terror of being aware forever. And she was now its most empathetic, most tormented, and most aware piece. A masterpiece of conscious suffering, forever a part of the monument. Can you feel the chill, listener? The one that is not just in the air, but in your very bones, waiting.